in a quiet village just outside Salzburg, Austria. The name Margaretha Krüger had long faded from the headlines. Once a nurse, once a sister, once a wife. Now simply Grandma Greta to a few remaining neighbors. 4 years, she lived in a modest wooden cottage with ivy crawling up its sides, surrounded by rose bushes she planted herself decades ago. At 105, she had buried everyone she ever loved. Her husband Franz, her only son Dieter, even her younger brother Heinrich. Most assumed she was simply waiting for her final breath. But on one winter morning that changed. It began with a fall. Margaretha was reaching for her favorite teacup when she lost her balance and collapsed in her tiny kitchen. A neighbor found her hours later, unconscious but breathing. She was rushed to the Salzburg University Hospital where, despite her age, she stabilized quickly. But what stunned the doctors wasn't her recovery. It was the scan they performed during routine checks. Dr. Elise Mahler, a seasoned gynecologist, stared at the ultrasound machine for a full minute before uttering, "Das ist unmöglich." She called in a second doctor, then a third. All were silent. They found a fetus. A living fetus. In a woman whose womb had no right to carry life. The world reacts. News leaked. First on obscure medical forums, then local papers, and finally global networks. The headlines varied. The oldest mother in history. BBC. Womb of wonder. 105-year-old woman pregnant in Austria. CNN. Divine intervention or medical marvel. Al Jazeera. By the time Margaretha awoke from a 2-day rest, she was already a global sensation. Paparazzi circled the hospital. Reporters camped outside her home. The Vatican sent an inquiry. NASA even called. Some believed it was fake, others called it a miracle. And through it all, Margaretha remained calm. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered to Dr. Elise. "But if it's God's will, then I will see it through." The unseen chapter of her past. Few knew that Margaretha once volunteered as a test subject in a controversial fertility study in the 1970s. Her name had been erased from the official records when funding was cut. The study aimed to cryogenically preserve viable embryos for future implantation. Decades passed and the project was shelved. Or so they thought. What none of the researchers knew was that one embryo, fertilized from her late husband Franz's sample, had survived in stasis, sealed in her womb due to a rare calcification process. It had lain dormant for nearly 40 years. But after the fall, her body responded as if shocked back to life. Hormonal shifts reawakened the embryo. Science couldn't explain it fully. Faith didn't care to. Months of watchful waiting. Doctors were hesitant but supportive. A rotating team of specialists monitored her around the clock. Journalists begged for interviews. But Margaretha stayed silent. Her only request, "Let me give birth in peace." She spent her days knitting booties and humming lullabies she hadn't sung since her son Dieter was born in 1947. At night she spoke to the baby aloud. "They say I'm too old," she'd whisper, stroking her belly. "But you, my little one, you came to me when I needed you most." Each day, new letters poured in. Blessings, threats, medical theories, and marriage proposals from lonely old men. But she read only the ones from children. One letter from an 8-year-old in Nairobi read, "Dear Grandma Greta, I believe in you. You're magic. Please name your baby Hope." The miracle unfolds. 7 months into the pregnancy, her condition grew critical. Her bones ached, her breathing labored, and her heartbeat irregular. The hospital considered termination. But Margaretha refused. "I've carried death in my heart for decades," she told Dr. Elise. "Let me carry life one more time." At 35 weeks, on a stormy December night, the team prepped her for a C-section. No one spoke, the weight of history hung over them. At 11:13 p.m., the room filled with the tiny cry of a newborn girl. Margaretha, barely conscious, opened her eyes and smiled. "She's here," she asked. "She's here," Dr. Elise confirmed, placing the child gently on her chest. Tears streamed down wrinkled cheeks as Margaretha whispered, Hope. Her name is Hope. The world watches. The moment the news broke that Margaretha Krüger had safely delivered a baby at 105, chaos followed. The hospital was forced to shut down its main entrance. Hundreds of news vans surrounded the gates. Drones hovered overhead. Journalists from Tokyo to Toronto camped in sleeping bags. Offers for exclusive rights came in from Netflix, BBC, and even Oprah's team. Social media exploded. Hashtag Miracle at 105. Hashtag Grandma Greta. Hashtag Hope Born Again. Hashtag Heaven in Austria. Conspiracy theorists claimed the baby was AI generated. Some believed aliens had intervened. Religious leaders called it a sign of the end times. A sect in Brazil began calling Margaretha the womb of prophecy. But Margaretha, safe in a private wing under 24-hour guard, held her baby and ignored the noise. "Let the world argue," she said softly. "My purpose is right here." Living legends and medical ethics. Hospitals around the world demanded access to her DNA. Universities begged for interviews. The Austrian government assigned her a legal guardian and a team of child welfare officers. The debate began. Was it ethical to allow a centenarian to give birth? Should the baby be taken for her safety? Was this scientific negligence or divine destiny? Dr. Elise Mahler, who had grown emotionally attached to both mother and child, stood in front of a televised press panel and said with tears in her eyes, "I have delivered over 700 babies, but never one born into such light and such fire. This isn't just about medicine. It's about meaning." The hospital's ethics board ultimately ruled that Margaretha was of sound mind and showed no signs of mental or physical incapacity to raise her child, with support. But that didn't stop public pressure. The ghosts of her past. One evening, as Hope napped in her arms, Margaretha received a letter with no return address. Inside was an old photograph, her son Dieter as a child, holding a toy train. Her hands trembled. She hadn't seen that photo in 60 years. The back read, "You were always stronger than you believed. F. Franz." Her late husband. The memories came rushing back. How they'd tried for a second child and failed. The miscarriages. The cold mornings in the fertility clinic. The tears she cried into his sweater. The promises he made under candlelight. And how, in his final days, he whispered, "If we can't raise another child in this life, maybe the next." Now here she was, cradling their daughter, his daughter, decades after he died. And for the first time in years, she smiled through her sorrow. Raising Hope. Raising a child at 105 was not easy. Margaretha could no longer walk unaided. Her hearing faded in one ear. Her bones creaked under the weight of each step. But her mind was a vault of love, resilience, and lullabies. She had a young live-in nurse named Leah, a kind Filipino woman who had lost her own baby to a rare disease. The moment Leah held Hope, something in her eyes lit up. "This child," she told Margaretha, "was born for more." Margaretha, sitting by the fireplace one snowy morning, whispered to her baby, "You're not just mine. You're the world's child. But I get to love you first." Hope grew strong. Her first tooth came at 3 months. Her laugh was contagious. Her eyes, bright green like Franz's, scanned the room with alertness far beyond her age. Choice. 1 year passed. Margaretha turned 106. Doctors warned her. Her heart was weakening. Her time was short. Social workers returned with questions about legal custody. Dozens of families volunteered to adopt Hope when Margaretha passed. But Margaretha had already written a will, one that stunned everyone. She requested that Dr. Elise Mahler adopt Hope as her legal mother upon her passing, and Leah as her godmother. She said in a recorded message, "Science brought her into this world, faith sustained her, and love must raise her. Elise gave her life, Leah gave her comfort. Give her a name. That is enough." Tears fell as the video played in a legal courtroom. No one objected. The legacy. On the eve of her second birthday, Little Hope clutched a candle in a public vigil held in Salzburg's main square. Thousands gathered to honor the oldest known mother in recorded history, Margaretha Krüger, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep just 3 days prior. In her final moments she had whispered, "Thank you for choosing me, little one." Hope would grow up with 2 mothers, Elise and Leah, and thousands of adopted hearts across the globe. A foundation was created in Margaretha's name, the Last Cradle Initiative, focused on fertility research, women's health awareness, and care for orphan newborns. In schools across Europe, Hope's birth became part of a modern history curriculum. And once, on her 12th birthday, Hope stood at the edge of Margaretha's favorite rose garden and whispered to the wind, "Mama, I will make the world softer like you did." The voice of hope. By the time she was 18, Hope Krüger Mahler was a name known across the world, not as a curiosity, but as a symbol. She had grown into a tall, eloquent young woman with a calm presence that could quiet rooms and a gaze that made skeptics believe. Raised with the tenderness of Elise and the deep spiritual nurturing of Leah, Hope learned early the weight of her name. At 16, she stood before the United Nations Youth Council in Geneva and delivered a speech titled, "The Womb That Waited." Began. "I was born from the body of a woman who the world believed was finished. But she gave me her beginning. And now I must carry her voice into the places where women's choices are silenced." The hall erupted in applause. Secrets buried in stone. Shortly after her 18th birthday, Hope received a package. No return address. Inside was a box filled with old photographs, handwritten letters, and a data chip labeled, "Experiment 9K. Confidential." She sat alone in her room as the evening rain tapped gently on the windows. Plugging in the chip, she uncovered something no one had ever told her. Margaretha and Franz had been part of a secret clinical trial in 1978, one designed to test long-term cryoembryonic viability. Funded by a now-defunct pharmaceutical company in Berlin, the trial had aimed to preserve legacy life. Children conceived but not born for later implantation when technology advanced. Out of over 300 test subjects, only 1 embryo had survived undisturbed. The documents revealed chilling details. Risk projections, failure notes, even a memo discussing Margaretha's age as a disqualifier. But at the bottom of one file, scribbled in ink, it read, "Subject 9K shows rare womb calcification. Could be a natural stasis chamber. Leave untouched." Hope stared at that line for hours. "I wasn't just born. I was saved. Preserved like a secret seed." She called Dr. Elise, who confirmed everything with tears in her voice. Elise had known, but had promised Margaretha she'd let Hope discover it when she was ready. "I am ready now," Hope said softly. "And the world must know." The interview that shook the world. At 19, Hope agreed to a global exclusive with BBC World. The interview was live, raw, and unscripted. Sitting across from renowned journalist Adrian Blackwell, she wore a simple white blouse and Margaretha's heart-shaped pendant. "Adrian. Hope, when you were born, many thought you were a miracle. Others called it madness. Now that you've uncovered the truth about the program, do you still believe your birth was meant to happen?" Hope, smiling. "Absolutely. Science preserved me. But love delivered me." Adrian. "What would you say to those who call it unethical, that a woman at 105 had no business being a mother?" Hope. "She wasn't just a mother. She was a message. A living letter written by time, reminding the world that life doesn't follow our schedules. We do not decide when a person's purpose ends." The interview went viral. Universities requested to add her speech to ethics courses. The Vatican invited her to speak at a bioethics summit. She declined most offers. "I don't want to be a celebrity," she said. "I want to be useful." A letter from the past. On a quiet Sunday morning, Hope visited Margaretha's gravesite alone. She brought white roses and a journal. As she brushed away the leaves from the marble headstone, she noticed something odd. A metal capsule buried beneath the base. Carefully she opened it. Inside was a single letter. "My dearest Hope. If you are reading this, it means I have gone on ahead. I always knew you would be curious, that you'd find your way to the truth. I asked Dr. Elise to protect it until you were strong enough to carry it without bitterness. You were born not just to live, but to remind others that endings can be beginnings. That even a forgotten woman in the corner of the world can give rise to something divine. Your life is not a mistake nor an accident. You are my harvest, with all that I ever was. Mama. Hope cried for the first time in years. Not from pain but from profound peace. Full circle. At 21, Hope launched the Krüger Foundation for Legacy Life, an organization dedicated to ethical fertility preservation, single-parent support, and aged care. She refused to profit from her story. Instead, she toured orphanages, hospitals, and underfunded research labs. She visited women struggling with infertility and hugged every one of them. I am a testimony, she would whisper. Not of perfection but of purpose. She even returned to Margaretha's old cottage in Salzburg. It had been turned into a heritage home by the town. Inside, everything was preserved. Her rose garden, her teacups, even the knit booties she made for baby Hope. As Hope stood in the nursery, sunlight flooding through lace curtains, she whispered, "You made room for me. Now I'll make room for others." The last cradle. Years later, when Hope was 30 and had adopted a baby girl from Sudan, a journalist asked her, "What's the most powerful thing you remember about your mother?" Hope, now composed and graceful, looked directly into the camera and said, "She told me the womb was not where life ends, but where it begins again. I was born from her ashes. I was her last cradle." My friends, if this story of a 105-year-old woman giving birth has taught us anything, it's this. It's never too late. Not to hope. Not to believe. Not to begin again. It does not stop purpose. Delay is not denial. And miracles, they don't run on our schedule. They arrive when we least expect them, but when we need them most. So wherever you are in life, whatever you're waiting for, keep the faith. Your time is not over. Your story is still being written. And remember, if a 105-year-old woman can bring new life into the world, then surely you can birth your dreams too. Don't give up. Your miracle might just be a heartbeat away. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep spreading hope. Sparkling heart.